One of the most important decisions you can make in Rise of Kingdoms is simply picking a great kingdom to be in. In this video, we're going to talk about exactly how we organize our kingdom 1075 so that you get a better sense of what a well-run kingdom might look like and how you find a great home for yourself in Rise of Kingdoms. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming. Today, we've got with me Negan, co-king of 1075, and we're going to walk through how we organize this kingdom. A number of you have asked how that is done so that you can decide how to run your kingdom. I think we've got a pretty good blueprint here of how to organize a huge organization. We actually have 950 plus players for whom we are tracking their performance, which is kind of insane. Negan, hello, welcome.
Hi there. And something else that I was just thinking about is the fact that you and I have both, jumped around to some other kingdoms. And so we've gotten some experience with how other kingdoms are run to give us a better idea of, what we liked and what we didn't like that they did. And I feel like we've brought a lot of that here.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. We also have in our Discord server, linked in the description, a Council of Kings, where the kings of literally any kingdom who will bother to sort of prove yes, I'm the king of this kingdom, can gain access and chat about literally whatever they want. So it's been relatively quiet in that server, but every now and then folks talk about how they're organized. I suspect after this video, a lot of people will be talking there. For those of you that are new to the channel, I'm a sponsored content creator for Rise of Kingdoms. Consider subscribing to the channel for daily Rise of Kingdoms videos that help you get value and smash your enemies. Let's get this thing started. Negan, there's so much to talk about, but first and foremost, I think we should give just a little bit of context to our kingdom, and then dive right into how we're organized. So our kingdom has 6 main alliances in it. There's the Wolves, Guardians, Noble Legion, Mofos, Mighty Family, and PO. So we've got 6 alliances. That is a lot of players. And we realized pretty quickly that getting this whole group aligned around what we're doing is not simple.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it all boils down to having good, effective communication with the rest of the kingdom and specifically the kingdom leadership. Because for KVK 1, even, around the time the Lost Temple is open or shortly thereafter, it really needs to be less of a alliance focused mentality and really a kingdom focused mentality, because after the Lost Temple is conquered and things are kind of figured out in terms of who's the dominant alliance and where other people's roles fit in, you really need to start preparing for KVK. And it's an us versus them, and us not being the alliance, it's us the kingdom versus them. And so the quicker that your kingdom aligns in terms of communication and working together and having a common goal and a common plan, the better off you're going to be, not just in KVK, but just in growth of your kingdom, happiness of your players, etc. I mean, if you want the epitome of what not to do and how this doesn't work for you, you look at Chiz's restart project where you had a civil war in the middle of KVK 1. That is not what you want, and it's because there was not good communication amongst the alliances, is my impression at least. And so having good communication starts from the ground up, and it doesn't have to be Discord. I mean, if you use Line or whatever, I mean, even just a good group chat in-game can go a long way. But, having a good structure like a Discord server really goes a long way, because you can set roles and get people into different territory chats and leadership chats and high council chats. That way you can really structure everything the right way and make sure that there's good communication no matter what the topic needs to be.
One of the things that we realized as we were organizing this kingdom is that there's a bunch of things that we've been doing but hadn't ever documented. So we put together a 1-page diagram that illustrates how we actually run the kingdom, the full top to bottom roles, responsibilities, and breakdown of kind of what is being worked on so that anyone can understand what we're doing. And honestly, I would think, copy the blueprint that we've put together. So I'm going to put that up on the screen now, and we can walk through how I think a kingdom should be run. And of course, there's other ways to do it, but this seems to be working pretty well.
Good communication and effective understanding between all the alliances, and even in a workplace, not a game. Being able to communicate effectively your expectations for someone, and then holding them accountable to that generally works well. And so even in this situation, whether it's your expectations for another alliance, your expectations for another player, your expectations for your T5s, your expectations for your whales, the better you can communicate that across the board throughout the whole kingdom, the better it's going to be. So that way people understand kind of what's expected of them, what are the consequences going to be if they deviate from that, and just getting the whole kingdom in alignment on that, I think, is really important.
This is the diagram that we put together that sets that clear expectation of like kind of who's doing what. We don't have all the names in here for this version that we're showcasing, but let's kind of start from the top and then work our way through it. At the very top, there's the king role. And I think a healthy role for a king is actually to set the vision for the kingdom, because there's way too much to do. There's way too much to do for any one person to be able to effectively think big picture for what the kingdom needs to do and go do all of that work. So there's the king, and then leaning on our Game of Thrones terminology here, we've got the hand of the king, who actually goes and builds what the king is sort of envisioning for the direction of the kingdom. So in our kingdom, really, like, Negan and I primarily fill that like king role of setting the vision to say like, hey, if we want to be successful, here's where we need to go, here's what we need to do. And there are players that really go and run with those kind of ideas and make sure that they happen.
Before we move on, I do want to talk about one other thing that is something that I've noticed that I think that we do well compared to a lot of other kingdoms, that is something to look for in a kingdom as well, which is a healthy king rotation.
Hmm.
As much as Chiz always likes to refer to me as, oh, the king of the kingdom, I really don't consider myself that way. I rotate it. There's sometimes where I might hold it for a little bit, but I rotate it fairly frequently. I really don't consider myself that way. I'm certainly not hoarding it. But I've been in other kingdoms, and I'm not going to say which, but literally the kingdom I was in before this, where it never rotated. It was always one person, and every decision had to be run through him, and titles had to go through him, and heaven forbid he wasn't online or whatever else, everything just grinded to a standstill. And it's just not healthy. It doesn't make for a good environment. It doesn't make for a high functioning kingdom. If for some reason I were to just disappear for a week, our kingdom would still go on. Like
Yeah.
it wouldn't just grind to a halt. People would still be able to get stuff done because they're not just relying on me for everything. So having something like that in a kingdom, I think, is really important to be looking for, either in your own kingdom or if you're looking to migrate somewhere. I think having a healthy king rotation um, lends itself well to having a high functioning, productive kingdom.
Which is really good segue to the next boxes on here, which are peacetime kings and wartime kings. So there's
Right.
at least half a dozen people rotating into that king position. The peacetime kings are controlling the titlers, so the queen, the general, and the prime minister, and are doing things at times of peace. They don't have to be like super warriors that are in that role. It's just people who can do that really important work, making sure the kingdom is running well, making sure the buffs are happening on schedule and according to a plan. While as the wartime kings, they are very much the opposite direction. They're not really concerned about how the kingdom is run during times of peace, but during times of war, making sure that we as a kingdom are strategically making the right moves, that we are literally like gemming at every opportunity, that new damage buff, and that the rallying stuff, because they're holding the king title, which is kind of like the best buffs in the game.
Exactly. And you know, no matter who, or not who, no matter which side of the coin you're on, if you're a peacetime king or a wartime king, I mean, these still need to be trusted individuals that are getting put into this role because, separate from the fact that it's generally the dominant alliance that's then getting the R5 where this person could really wreak havoc. I've seen dominant alliances in some kingdoms that have been disbanded just because you get the wrong
Ugh.
disgruntled person in there. And that's obviously completely detrimental to the entire kingdom, and all of those players. But even someone that's just vengeful and wanted to, you know, imprison someone for no good reason. I mean, so the king does hold a lot of important power where, you need to make sure these are trusted individuals that are holding that position, but still, you should be able to find, like Chiz said, I mean, a half dozen people that can be trusted to hold that role, that can all, be empowered to make decisions on the fly if needed, and then, go from there.
Yeah, yeah. And to give a really concrete example of that, this KVK, right? Like I held king for part of the day, and then I went to bed, passed it to Negan, and then Negan went to bed and passed it to Sterling. And like 24/7. We've got the damage buffs going, we've got real direction going for how we should be fighting, where we should be fighting with an appropriate strategic thinker kind of at the helm. Makes a huge difference. So at the next tier here, we have what's called a high council. A lot of kingdoms have this, but never before have I heard such clear like reason for having one, which for us is to kind of just generate alignment across all of the alliances. And like, yeah, different leaders have different opinions here. So the high council is two officers from each alliance. Typically, it's the primary R5 of an alliance and one other. And we're working together to make sure that we all agree on what path we're going to take with certain directives for the kingdom, whether it was like figuring out how we were going to gather data or how to pick allies or measure performance or like prepare for KVK, whatever those things are. This group gets alignment before we then take it to a separate group, and that is every officer in the kingdom. And that's our
But
leadership
and
group.
and let's be clear, just in case, I don't know, it seems really obvious to me, but I always like to try to step out of my own shoes. To be clear on why we separate a high council. The reason for that is, if you have six alliances like we do, or even if you had four alliances that are your main alliances, times eight people that hold
9.
R4 plus
Yeah.
an R5, so
Yeah.
nine people at a minimum if you don't rotate in any leadership. Nine people times even four alliances, that's 36 people. And if you're needing to make decisions on the fly, all the kinds of things that Chiz was just talking about, deciding how your contribution score for KVK is going to work, or trying to decide, oh, should we ally with this kingdom for KVK, or the really important high level decisions. You can't have 36 people weighing in on that decision, let alone if you have six alliances like we do times nine. We have 54 people potentially in that leadership. You just can't do it. Not that their opinions are not important. You just have to narrow it down to certain people per alliance that can speak for that alliance. So it's not, 50 people or 30 people all throwing in their 2 cents on what's going on. If you
Without
have,
reading any of the other messages. Right?
right,
Like just like
you
dropping
know,
in like, well, I think this, and they don't read it. Not that that happens in our kingdom, but like, look, there's a really good rule of thumb for meetings in general, which is that for every person you add to the meeting, add 15 minutes to the duration of the meeting. So like a 60-person group, which like I think we've got like 60 people in leadership because most alliances have more than 9 officers.
sure,
Um,
of course they do.
it's yeah, it's just forget it. So the High Council gets like the big picture alignment, and then the leadership team, which is all the officers of the kingdom, sort of refine that and give feedback. And at that point, it's already mostly decided after it's left High Council, and it gets strengthened in leadership. But typically, we don't like completely reverse a decision because already it's had great thinking put into it from the High Council group.
Well, and plus the people from the respective alliances trust what their officers that are in the High Council chat would decide for them. I mean, these are people that are trusted officers in those respective alliances. And so, if it comes out of High Council, it's usually not going to be questioned by those individual alliances because they know that, oh, so and so thought this is a good idea. Well, then I'll go along with it because they know that whoever that person is that's in High Council, wouldn't make a bad decision.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Everyone feels like their interests are at heart when it's representation from all alliances. They don't feel left out.
right. I
Um,
honestly can't remember the last time something came out of High Council and then got any kind of major revision, at the leadership level, just because it's already been refined by that point,
yeah, I actually can't think of a single thing where that was the case. And this
Right.
document, by the way, is an example of something that went through this process where I had an idea for putting this together. I sat down and did a lot of the work with the Hand of the King. And then we shared it with the High Council and they approved and we refined it along the way. And then we shared it with leadership and they approved and but after some refinement. And we actually have a town hall that we're going to schedule for this weekend where we review it with the entire kingdom. And it's already gone into our kingdom Discord. So folks that are watching the kingdom Discord have already had eyes on this. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to get done in the kingdom, though, like kind of an astonishing amount of stuff. And we actually, I put this name Task Forces because I didn't have something else in mind. Maybe there's a slicker name we could come up with, but there are very specific things that need regular attention and dedicated attention. And so we've got owners for all of these different things. That includes a title team that administers and manages the Kingdom Buff schedule and communicates that out. So at the beginning of every week, there's literally a calendar that goes out that's like, hey, here's what the buffs are going to be, plan accordingly.
Which once again goes back to the idea of a king that doesn't just control everything. Like I said, in this old, you know, my previous kingdom, the king just decided when the buffs were that was convenient for him or whatever he thought was convenient for the kingdom, and that was that, and he just fired off the buffs. Versus in our kingdom, we have a title team that's really represented by almost every alliance, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, yeah.
And they decide that I don't pick the buffs. I
Nope.
just do the buff when they tell me to do the buff,
Tell
because
me what to spend my gems on and when to spend them.
right, because they, have maybe a little bit better pulse on, what their members are looking for in terms of buffs. Do we want, it's the MG Power Day. Do we want a building buff or do we want a research buff? I don't know, but they're going to tell me because they know what the demand has been, what people are really looking for, and what time to do it that's going to fit best for the kingdom and based on other buffs. And we have people that are empowered to make those decisions. And, me and Chiz and any of the other people that hold king, we don't weigh in on that. I really could care less. Yes, I want to use the buffs too, but I do not put my finger on the scale at all for that. And neither does Chiz. And we let that group be empowered to make those decisions, and then they communicate it out to the kingdom, and then the king just fires the buff at whatever time they tell us to fire the buff. So, that's really the I think one of the really neat things that we do as a kingdom that a lot of other kingdoms could maybe learn from is empowering these other groups, these task forces that Chiz is talking about. Like we've got a couple people that really enjoy creating different little events. Like maybe for KE, we want to do a tournament, a KE tournament, where it's a bracketed thing where people can fight against each other and win some kind of either a kingdom trophy or an RSS from our kingdom bank or whatever. And we empower people to just organize that, communicate it, run it, and then tell us who won, and we'll pay them out of the bank or we'll pay them with a kingdom trophy. It's not something where there's just this central core of leadership that's having to, micromanage every stupid little thing. We really empower people to just take on these other tasks. That's why he calls it a task force. And it's something that they're passionate about and they enjoy, and then we let them run with it. And
Yep.
it gives them something to enjoy, and it gives some different levels of communication in the kingdom, so it's not all just coming from one person, it's someone else that's leading this up, and that way people feel more involved.
Yeah, 100%. Because this might feel like a lot, but like remember, this is an organization with 950 or so plus people. That's a massive group of people. In that group, someone is assuredly passionate about one of these things and has more time than like I do or Negan does to do that thing really, really well. So just make sure that they're knighted and then they do the thing.
Well, and the other thing that I feel like this achieves is it keeps the kingdom engaged,
Mhm.
because those people that are passionate about something, they have the opportunity to step up and get involved, because the probably the number one threat of every kingdom in this game is stagnation. Wouldn't you agree, Chiz?
A
I mean,
100%.
more than any whale that you're worried is going to zero someone, or more than any possible threat you could think of out there, stagnation is your number one threat. And if you don't know what that means the idea that just the kingdom just gets dull and boring, and then people stop playing or they migrate out, and next thing you know, before you even realized what happened, you're sitting in a dead kingdom. And that's not any fun either. I've been there too. And I think that goes to how well all of this works to keep people engaged, is the fact that we're in one of the oldest kingdoms in the game, and yet we have some of the highest participation levels of almost any kingdom, in terms of just overall activity. If people were paying attention to our KVK and our Eve scores and our Kingdom Honor scores, I mean, we have very high levels of activity, which is, I think, pretty unusual for a kingdom this old. I mean, when you start looking at the idea that there's you know 2,000 plus kingdoms, kingdom numbers out there, and we're sitting here at 75. I mean, we're very, very old kingdom, and yet we have a high level of activity, just because we try to do all these things to keep people involved and engaged, and I think that it works well.
Yeah, I mean the kingdom's like 700 days old, which is kind of insane, right? Um, so other task forces include uh, kingdom recruitment. We've got a group dedicated to gathering data and figuring out, like for instance, how we're going to measure, track KVK performance. That way, we can actually like understand what our members are doing over time and make adjustments accordingly. We have a complaint department that like literally receives and interacts with feedback that players give from the kingdom so that we can improve as a kingdom. We've got Ark of Osiris coordination, so we have a bunch of shells where uh, it's sort of open for people to join that aren't in a main alliance or the second team of an alliance, but they want to play Ark. They can just know what times are available and pick an alliance and then join it and then play. We've got Mightiest Governor coordination. I'm not going to get into this topic here, how we arrange our Mightiest Governor and why that's critical to our success, in my opinion, but I'll put a card up in the top. It turns out that rewarding contribution, not spend, is a pretty cool idea. We've got a diplomacy team, a communications team, territory management, a spook team, which is basically data gathering, but oriented toward gathering data about other kingdoms, and an event team, as Negan was mentioning earlier. So all of these different task forces do critical functions for the kingdom, and it's a 100% volunteer group that's doing these things. The only group that like sort of gets a compensation is the title team, because we typically by default give them the kingdom trophies as a way of saying like, hey, thank you for all the time you spend distributing these kingdom titles. So the next tier of this diagram is our T5 player base. And, this is pretty straightforward. We've got a separate channel in Discord where the T5 players can ask questions about what to rally with, what to garrison with, about gear, really like detailed questions to execute well in that role. But something that we're taking really seriously after this last KVK is standards for performance for players that are in the top 300 by Empower. This is something more relevant for us because we're an Imperium kingdom. So we can only migrate in players under 35 million power because we have so much power in our top 300 players. So, we're watching that pretty closely.
And quite frankly, we're not the only ones. I mean, a lot of the other high performing, imperium or close to imperium power kingdoms have really started doing the same thing, where they're really taking a hard look at uh, a cross reference of who is in the top 300 and what did they do for us this last KVK, and are they pulling their weight? Because if you're contributing towards Imperium and you're and also contributing towards KVK matchmaking, people forget about that, which is, if you're a 200 million power player and you're not really showing up to fight, all you're doing is making our matchmaking for KVK harder and not doing anything to help us win it. So, a lot of kingdoms are looking at that because, at these upper echelon of kingdoms that are fighting each other, it's becoming harder and harder because there's more and more T5s, there's more people with good equipment, more people with max commanders. It's becoming a tougher fight. You look at our friend Death Squad's kingdom, who had a really amazing kingdom, and they essentially lost their KVK, and because it's getting even when they have such amazing players, they still were not able to succeed. And that's the last thing that you want. And if players are in the high levels of power, they need to be pulling their weight.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
they're not, then we're taking a hard look at those people, and we're not the only one. But it's one
No.
of those things that we're
I actually feel like
we're
we're really late to the game in terms of doing that. Maybe we're middle of the pack for sincerely saying like, hey, these people who have a pattern of not contributing, like what do we do? Because the cost is actually astonishing. Not only do you have a harder opponent than you should have, because you have all these people that fit into this category of contributing to a harder match but not doing anything. But then all the people who are contributing have to dole out that many more resources for field fighting, lose more in the field because instead of having an overwhelming presence, you have fewer people there, send more troops to die. And by the way, because you don't have field presence, more troops are dying in rallies and all these other things. Have to get more honor farmed to get the same outcome at the end of KVK for Alliance or Kingdom honor. I mean, this list goes on and on and on. It's actually astonishing to me how much of a cost it is to the kingdom to have players that don't contribute. And I'm not talking about like, oh, this KVK, like I couldn't do anything because there's this thing going on in my life. That's fine. We're talking about like a pattern of non-contribution, right?
right. I mean, or even just doing like bare minimum kind of things that show that, okay, you are at least logging in every day, for God's sake. I mean, like, did you at least just burn your daily free honor or AP? I mean, like, could you at least have done that? I mean, like something just to help the Alliance and the Kingdom. But separate from the actual fighting in KVK, there's the really obvious part, which is, you're preventing people that do want to join from being able to join because you're sitting here taking up a seat, doing nothing that someone else wants to come sit in. Because I mean, every day we're getting messages from people that are above that 35 mil cap. Right now we probably have at least a dozen people waiting that want to come join our kingdom that can't,
A lot
and
more than
people that
that,
are
dude.
sitting here, huh?
A lot more than that.
Oh, well, yeah, right, yeah,
Like
and
just a
and
dozen mega whales that are in
oh, right.
queue,
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I
right?
mean,
Like plus
and
there's all the
and
other people like from 35 to 55 million as an example that like can't get
sure,
in because we're
exactly,
Imperium.
and
Yeah.
And so, that's one of the things that we're trying to, be honestly do a better job of. Is I mean, we're not saying that we're a perfect kingdom. We're trying to do a better
No.
job of that now after this KVK of, managing those people and trying to, get some of those low contributors maybe even out of the kingdom if they're just not a good fit. And that way we can make room for, you know, fresh blood that wants to come join us that actually want to show up to fight. So
Yeah.
and it's one of those things that, when we're talking about things that you could do as a leader of a kingdom, that's one of those things you need to be looking at sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Um, Now something that we did look at sooner this is something I think we started looking at later, is like top 300 by power contribution. But something we have been doing for a while is member level contribution. So this is the last box on the diagram, is members. And we track KVK contribution, and we've always said, like, hey, each alliance sets their own standards for what is okay contribution or not. And, you know, those alliance officers have to decide, like, hey, is this person worth the seat in my alliance? Or is their presence just costing my other alliance members more because it's dead weight that they're carrying, right? Because, like, again, every player that's not in your alliance rallying forts so that you get action points and fighting when you need to be fighting is truly, like, kind of a burden to the rest of the alliance. So we leave that up to the alliance leaders to decide, like, what to you is acceptable or not. And, like, I don't weigh in on that, with the exception now of the top 300 players by power, where, like, gosh, I think going into this next KVK, we're going to say, like, here's the bare minimum. And, like, if you don't do this, then, like, you're definitely not contributing. And we got to talk about, like, what do you want to do?
Right. Which, I mean, even with these top 300, we're still kind of leaving it for now up to those individual alliances to address it, to, you know, because they know their players better than I do. You know, if XYZ player is really low contribution, I'm going to that alliance leader and saying, hey, this person is a concern. What's the story here? And then, you know, that alliance person, generally the high council person from that alliance, you know, needs to either go talk to that person and say, hey, what's going on? Or they may already know, like, oh, they had some COVID related stuff going on and that's why they whatever. Oh, okay, fine. But, you know, they kind of need to take ownership of that person and either say, yeah, you know, this person isn't up to par, or, oh, there's some, you know, extenuating circumstance that's going to be different in the future. Although I think for the next KVK, like Chiz is saying, we might even just take that off of the officers' shoulders, because, you know, some officers don't want to be the bad guy, and I get that. You know, where if we just say at the beginning of KVK, if you were in the top 300, we could even give them a list. This is your minimum expectation for deads and for honor. And if you don't meet those, there's going to be a different conversation at the end of KVK. And that way, kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where
Yes.
you set an expectation and then you manage to that expectation. And then there's no surprises, there's no questions, there's no why did I get kicked or why am I being asked to leave or any of that stuff. It's, hey, we told you in advance this is what you needed to do, and either you do it or you don't. And if you don't, then I don't have any sympathy for you. So
Yeah. Now, kingdoms that are not Imperium should still be thinking about this, in my opinion, because
because if you're growing, you're gonna be marching towards Imperium whether you want to or not.
and even if you're not
Right.
growing, your matchup is harder. Your
Oh,
KVK
well,
is
that too.
harder
Sure.
because the players
Sure.
are just sitting there, and their power counts towards your kingdom's total power in the top 300, which is used to determine who you fight in KVK, right? So that
Yeah,
player where
absolutely.
you're like, oh, you know, I've known, you know, I'm just gonna come up with a name. We'll just say, you know, Bob. Although there is an I am Bob in our kingdom who's very exceptional, but
Right.
you know, we've known Bob since the beginning of the game, and you know, they're this person that we've just, you know, we've always known them. They've always been here, and, like, they've always been here is not the best reason to keep them in the premium alliance in the kingdom, because what
Or
happens,
even worse, like, oh, they were so good in KVK 1. But now it's
yeah,
KVK 5 and they
5,
haven't showed up for the last 4. Like, you know, I mean, great. It's, you know, what have you done for me lately, right? I mean,
yeah,
just, you know, you can't I'm going to do a reference that probably the vast majority of your stream won't get, but you can't be Al Bundy and you keep talking about how you scored 4 touchdowns in your high school football game. Like, you can't just do that for the rest of your life. Like, that's not going to work.
right. So these are players that are absorbing all of the, like, alliance chests and action points and all these other things, not contributing them back, and making your matchups harder. It's just savage all the way around, like, in a way that I actually didn't expect. But, like, these are real conversations that if you don't start having early, you end up with what I might call, like, truly just like a zombie kingdom, where you have all this dead power that is carried by some number of active players. And at some point, zombie kingdoms can no longer be carried that way anymore, and then they fall. And that sucks for all of your active players, right? So like the kindest thing you can do for your active players is manage what is happening with your more casual players that are high power. If all of this sounds really detailed and complicated, it sort of is. And this is why I have been advocating for a very long time that older kingdoms have a higher chance of being more organized, because everything you see here, this did not form overnight. I mean, this took like 3 KVKs to get to this point where it's like, oh yeah, we're pretty sophisticated about this, and like, here's what we're doing. So going to an older kingdom does not guarantee it's well organized, but it's given more time for more of these systems to have been put into place, and for people to realize like, hey, I have a problem, here's how we're going to solve it, right? For us, it was like, man, we really need data. Master scribe team. Hey, like people want to put on events. Event team, right? We're trying to figure out where flags go and which alliance owns what holy site. Territory management. Like that's how that all evolved over time. Now, if you're looking for a new kingdom, I would encourage you to ask some of these questions around like, hey, how is your kingdom organized? How are decisions made? I think for us, it's really clear and transparent, like how that whole process works now. And if you're interested in coming to Kingdom 1075, I'll have a link in the description to our recruiting Discord server. We're only taking players under 35 million power now because we are Imperium. But if we do drop out of Imperium, then we can take players on an ongoing basis that are under 55 million power. So you should consider joining the Discord regardless of what your power is. Heck, even if you just want to peek into what we think good organization of a recruiting Discord server looks like, you could come on in, check that out, and see what you think. Negan, any other thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I really enjoyed talking about this with you.
Yeah, man. This is like really important stuff. If you found this at all entertaining or helpful, please do me a favor, drop a like on the video. Consider subscribing to the channel for daily Rise of Kingdoms videos. And if you're looking for another interview where we talk about more of the details and mechanics of how each of these things actually is run, such as Mightiest Governor coordination, or the title team, or even the complaint department, I'll put a card up in the top for our Kingdom 1075 migration video, where we interviewed both Negan and also Juggernaut, who is now a 300 million power monster on the battlefield and contributor. Thanks again for being here, and until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom, and good luck picking a great kingdom to be in.